everyone, welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be that mediocre. I'm Sarah Muliati, and here's my co-host, Dr. Susan Ash. How are you doing, Susan?
Hi, Sarah. It's great to be here. We have a fantastic guest, and really looking forward to catching up with e-learning and fairy tales.
All right. Life Edge begins right now. And we're back. So Susan, who is our guest of honor?
We have the great honor to have Laura Gibbs here, and I've known Laura for many years. She has inspired me in the first early years of online learning. Laura, you want to talk a little bit about those early years of online education?
Well, the first time I taught online was in a course that Susan designed, and I was a big fan of the internet in graduate school, making web pages, connecting with people online. This was back in 1999. And when I came to OU, University of Oklahoma, I knew I wanted to teach online somehow at some point, and I got an opportunity to teach one of Susan's classes back in the day when it was just these lovely web pages that Susan had designed. I imagine they were probably even hand-coded, I'm not sure. Before we had an LMS, before we had online quizzes and gradebooks. So the course that Susan designed was just perfect for me. It was students reading literature and poetry and looking at art and sharing their thoughts and reflections about that. And I loved it. So I started teaching full-time online maybe a year or two after I'd done that first course with Susan through the College of Arts and Sciences on the main campus of OU, and I've been teaching online ever since.
That brings like such great memories. And at the time, you were doing a lot with, you actually did an entire anthology of fairy tales, right?
Right. The course that I teach is Mythology and Folklore, and so one of the projects I did, I guess this is maybe 5 or 6 years ago, was to create what I called an untext book, this gigantic anthology of mythology and folklore for the students to choose from. Because that's one of the things I like about teaching online is that you don't have to order the same textbook for everybody 6 months in advance and have it come to the bookstore. So we've got this untext book of 100 different collections of folk tales and fairy tales and mythology from around the world, and each week the students choose what they want to read. And sometimes they choose the same things. A unit like, say, Brothers Grimm is very popular, but other times they'll choose something that they've maybe never even heard of before the class. And if you calculate it out, I'd done it a few years ago when I tried to figure out how many possibilities there were, and it was like trillions or trillions of possibilities once you have so many things to choose from. And that's exciting. Everyone does their own thing.
Oh, that's really interesting. So each student can choose for themselves what they'd like to read for each week? Is that how it works?
Exactly. It's set up in these regional units. So for the first 2 weeks, we're looking at biblical and classical stories from the ancient world. And then we move on week by week to different geographical regions. So they're reading things that are sometimes related, like let's say it's the British and Celtic 2-week unit of class. Some students are reading Robin Hood and King Arthur. Other students are reading Welsh fairy tales or Irish folk tales. So when they go to read each other's stories and notes, they can sort of connect. They can say, oh, I didn't read King Arthur, but I was reading Robin Hood, because they're all blogging about what they read, and then they share with each other what they're reading. And then that leads to a kind of hopscotch. Like, let's say one week they read another student's story inspired by Welsh folk tales. And maybe they never would have thought to read Welsh folk tales for themselves, but they say, last week I read that really cool story and it was from this Welsh folk tale unit. Maybe I'll read that unit this week. So it's all interconnected, which is another thing I love about the internet and teaching online, is that the students actually can have more interaction with each other than they would in a regular classroom.
I love that. So your background is in classics, correct?
Right, but classics and folklore, because Aesop's Fables is my thing, and I'm looking with that. Yeah, and students really like Aesop's fables, and they usually don't realize that there are hundreds and hundreds of Aesop's fables. So I have plenty of fables to keep them entertained if they want to work on that for a project.
You know, I've thought this for a long time, and I've just never gotten around to asking you about it, but I've thought that it would be fun to collaborate with you sometime with kind of a management lessons using Aesop's fables.
Exactly. That's why Aesop's fables are still going strong. There aren't that many genres of ancient literature that are still going strong after 3,000 years, but Aesop's fables still has a lot of lessons to teach us. And I think that's why the students like them too. They'll often do, the writing they do for the class are retellings of old stories. And so they'll often do the students' Aesop, right? And so for, a famous one is the Ant and the Grasshopper. They'll imagine the Ant and the Grasshopper's two roommates in the dorm and having their Ant and Grasshopper contrast come out through college life. And you can adapt it to anything, really.
I like that. Sarah, have you studied much of Aesop's fables?
Not really. I mean, I've heard of the classic ones, like you said, the ant and the grasshopper, tortoise and the hare, and but yeah, I mean, I guess when I was small, I really like those international anthologies of fairy tales. Like there was one from UNICEF that I just kept reading over and over again. They had tales from the Philippines, from Europe, and I just really enjoyed that. And so I was really excited to know that. You've published a lot of anthologies of folk tales and mythology.
Right, that's really my approach is, how do these stories travel from person to person and also from country to country? So like you mentioned, the Philippines, one of the areas of the world that I'm really interested in is South Asia and India. And some of the ancient Aesop's fables are the same as Buddhist Jataka stories that we see in India. And we'll never know whether it went from India to Greece or from Greece to India because there was travel back and forth between those places in the ancient world. But a lot of these same stories and story motifs circulate all around the world, which is why I take that geographical approach in my classes, because students will realize it's like, whoa, that story from Iran is just like the Three Little Pigs story that I know, except it's with ducks instead of pigs. So the stories change, but you can recognize their similarities as they move from place to place. Yeah, so globalization, right? It was a theme before the economy made it a theme. Globalization of fairy tales and folk tales.
In your anthologies, do you do the translations yourself?
Well, I'm really lucky that, English is this language that so many scholars and folklorists have translated into. So when I can do my own translations, I really enjoy doing that. I've translated a lot from Latin because there are all kinds of medieval Latin folk tales that hadn't been put into English, because at a certain point, people could assume, a scholarly person would know Latin. Well, that's not true anymore. So I've translated a lot from Latin. And I still do. I still will find things in Latin that I know are not translating to English. And, the internet, it's so friendly. You can just throw a translation online and it's waiting there for whoever might need it in the future.
How did you get interested in classical languages? Is it something that in college or earlier? Do you always have a knack for languages?
I loved languages in college. So my major was actually Polish. I studied Polish and Russian. And then because the Polish Renaissance was something I was interested in, and Latin was the language of the Polish Renaissance, I studied Latin. I wrote my master's thesis on a bilingual Polish-Latin poet of the Renaissance. And it just, to me, I love to read, I love stories, and so every new language you learn is a ticket to get into all these new stories. So knowing English, we're very well off. You're never going to run out of stories to read in English. But it's very exciting when you know other languages and can read more stories. And then it's great to have friends who can help you. This summer, I've been working on a really new kind of folktale project for me on something called chain tales, like the house that Jack built, if you know that, or there was an old lady who swallowed a fly, that kind of story. And a woman I had met online who's an Indian author, has been helping me. She's been in Pune, India this summer, and when she goes to the gym, she talks to the other ladies at the gym, and they've been collecting stories in Marathi, and she's been translating them for me because I wouldn't have access to those stories without her help. And so she's been having the people write the stories down in Marathi, and then she translates them in English and sends them to me in the email, and I put them up at my blog. So it's this international internet story, and I'll have all those stories to share with my students in the fall. So that's going to be a fun thing this fall, something new.
That's amazing. So what kind of tales? It sounded like you said, I couldn't hear it. Was it pain tales?
Chain tales. Chain tales. It's
chain tales. Okay. Oh,
stories
okay. I understand chain tales. Yeah. That's so interesting, though. And why don't you describe what a chain tale is for our audience?
Well, usually people know the children's song. There was an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly, and then she swallowed a spider to eat the fly, and it goes on through the chains of all the things that she swallows, and it's a chain, and at the end, she swallows a horse, and she died, of course. I knew that song when I was a little kid, and I love The House That Jack Built when I was little. I like those accumulative stories, and they're like Aesop's fables. You find accumulative stories all over the world. Surprisingly enough, it's one of the ways that we use folk tales to work things out, to use our human brain power, and they're good for children, but they're also something that just sort of appeal to the human mind in the way we think and organize the world. And so when I was on my way to Austin 2 months ago, I guess it was, I've been working on this project for about 2 months. I was reading a collection of folk tales from India, and there was this Punjabi story about a rat, and it was a cumulative story, and I was just sitting there on the plane thinking, this story is so cool, and I've never read this story before. What if I made a collection of these chain tale stories? How would it go? What would it look like? And now here it is 2 months later. I've got 300 of these stories from literally all over the world, and I've learned a lot, and I've made some friends online from connecting through these stories, and people are interested in them. But yeah, it's one of those worldwide folktale types. You start poking around, you'll find them everywhere.
Okay, so I have to ask, after I don't know. Okay, after evaluating folk tales and stories and fairy tales, do you find any evidence, compelling evidence of space aliens?
Well, the great thing is, facts are not extremely important to me, but imagination rules. And so I try to get the students to think about exactly that, about space aliens, and whether the kinds of stories we tell now about space aliens, and obviously we tell lots of stories about them, whether, technology aside, whether those aren't a lot like the stories that people used to tell about monsters or talking insects or strange disembodied demons. And for my students, that's really a big help because they like science fiction or horror stories also. And to be able to look at stories from ancient times and realize the same kinds of concerns and questions and curiosity drove those storytellers as they do today is a big help in getting students connected to folklore who might not think they're interested in folktales or folklore.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so like the fairy circles, that's a good one. Like most of my students have heard of crop circles, and maybe they've thought about crop circles being an alien thing, like an alien landing pad or something. Well, if you look at the stories about fairy circles and traditional folk tales, and you'll find these not just in, say, the British Isles, where they're very common, you also find fairy circle stories from Africa, right? It's something that they can connect to. They've heard of crop circles, and now take my class, you can learn about fairy circles.
Wow.
So when people take your classes, I have a kind of funny story that, like, when I took children's literature in college, and then the teacher would say, oh, you know, people take this class and they think it's the easy reading class, you know, they don't know what it's really about. Do you see a lot of, like, misconceptions about, you know, your classes on mythology and folklore?
Well, I'll admit I feel really lucky that the classes I teach are not through the classics department or through a folklore department. They're through the general education program at OU.
Right.
And so that means the goal here is not so much to get students to be junior folklorists. So every once in a while I'll get a student who's an anthropology major or something who wants to learn something about academic folklore, the science of folklore, what professional folklorists do. But for the most part, my students are, well, Susan will appreciate this, petroleum engineering majors, right, or business majors at OU. And so the way the class works is not so much to present them with scholarly challenges, like I can imagine in a children's lit class where you want to really grapple with issues about, say, the history of children's lit as a scholarly project. This is more about how can you have a chance here as you're about to graduate from college, most of them are seniors, to read and write in a way that's really exciting for you, that makes you feel confident as a reader, confident as a writer. So I try to make the readings in class not too long, and so that they read it well and read it closely. They're not just skimming, to get to the end of the chapter of the textbook. And then the writing they do is creative writing rather than scholarly writing or essay writing like you might do in a regular academic class. And that's kind of scary at first. It's not hard really, but it's scary because they'll sometimes say, I haven't written anything creative since third grade, and they're a little bit hesitant at first, but then once they get into it, it's a lot of fun. So all the writing they do is creative writing. It's not writing research papers, say, like in a lot of other college classes.
I want to take your class.
It's so much fun, and I'll admit, like I was saying earlier before we got started, I've been having a hard summer. I'm really looking forward to the school year starting again because this class is so much fun. And I know that's true for my students too, because college students, their lives are chaotic, and sometimes my students are going through really difficult times, and I want to make this class to be something that's supportive. Like I was telling Susan earlier, I lost a cat today. We had to go to the vet and have our cat put to sleep. But the folktale that I did as my story of the day at my project, because, I wanted to still do my story of the day, was this folktale based on chains of mourning, when the mother and the father in the story lose their little miracle supernatural child. All the world starts to mourn with them. The dove sheds her feathers, and the apple tree loses its apples, and the well dries up. And that folktale, being able to connect with that, actually made me feel better this afternoon. And I think that happens to students too. If you give them imaginative literature and get them to engage with it in imaginative ways, that can sometimes be just what a person needs, and what a college student who's got a lot of stress and uncertainty going on might need. And so I'm glad that the class is like that. I don't want it to be a hard class or a tough class. I want it to be a fun class.
I love that. I totally agree with that philosophy. And it made me think too, of the rescue that happened to the soccer team in Thailand. And they were saying that in that particular cave, in that mountain area that's near Myanmar, that there was a folktale that has something to do with a princess and how she lost something. I don't know if you're familiar with that particular folktale, but it was kind of you'll probably recognize it's anyway, she was trapped in the mountain because she lost the love of her life for some reason. But the fact that they were rescued, apparently a lot of people, relatives were praying to that ghost or invoking that presence to protect the boys.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, one of the things I kind of joke with my students about, but it's really true, you never know when you might need stories to tell. And that's one of the things I was wondering, thinking about the boys in that cave in the park, is like, did they sing songs? Did they tell stories that, they had to do something to keep going? And maybe we'll find out about that later. It's one thing to sit around and tell stories around the campfire in the dark because you're out camping and it's fun, and you might tell scary stories in that situation because you're out camping and having fun. But in a setting like that where it's dark and you're very afraid, stories can can help you stay focused and stay human and connect with the people around you.
That's a really good point. It made me think of the Cameron by Boccaccio, and the fact that they were waiting out the plague, and what are they going to come back to?
Yeah, the Decameron's one of the units in my class, and in the little introductory unit, I tell students about what that was like. I mean, the devastation of the plague, and now I think, sad to say, they can sort of appreciate that they're aware of the possibility of some kind of virus or pandemic or something, and so it's scary to read that, and to think about that, but then here's the Decameron with these hilarious, wonderful stories that they told.
So you've been teaching online for, has it been like 16 years? It's been a long time.
It is a really long time. And what I love to tell people about is that it's every year it gets better, that no burnout at all, because teaching online, you have the opportunity to try new things and new experiments every semester, every year. In the classroom, I really didn't know what to do with myself, honestly, but teaching online, there's always something new you can try, and you can ask the students for ideas, and they have ideas. So yeah, I have enjoyed every minute of it, and if you ask me to go back to the classroom now, I'd say no thanks. I'll just keep teaching online.
Yeah, it's incredibly creative. Like I saw one of your course websites, and like your untextbook with all the different units, and what are some of the biggest changes in how you've approached your classes online?
Well, what's neat is that I haven't changed the approach that much, but the tools have gotten so much better, because when I first had the students publishing websites, and they've been doing that even before I started teaching online, so since back in 1999, Susan will remember what that was like. We were using Netscape Composer, and each student had 3 megabytes of space that they could use on the university server, and it was really hard, right? Because they had to use FTP to publish their stuff, and you could accidentally overwrite your stuff, oh no, into the world, and it was difficult, and I expected them to do it, and I helped them to do it, and they did it. It was great. But I'm so glad that it's easier now, so they all have blogs, and they can create websites, and there's so many different tools they can use for that I just let them choose, so I'll teach everyone step by step, keystroke by keystroke, how to use Blogger and how to use Google Sites. But if they're interested in WordPress or Tumblr or some other web publishing platform, that's great, and I can offer them those choices, because there's room for everything online, right? Whatever they want to do is fine with me, as long as we can all link to each other and see what we're doing.
Right, and you worked as a programmer for a while? I think I read that.
I was a database programmer way back in the day, and it's so funny to think about computers that weren't on the internet, right? So I can remember sitting in a cubicle and working on a database program and having problems, and there wasn't anybody you could go to for help. Like now, when I'm doing something online and I run into a technical problem, I have all these people I can ask for help, pretty immediate help, effective help, experts that I can talk to. So when I look at the opportunities my students have online that I didn't have when I was in college, I'm really excited for them, and I can, be the old grandma type, sharing that enthusiasm for the internet with them, so I have both perspectives.
I love that. And I still like mixing old tools with new ones. I have to say, I still use SeaMonkey, the old.
Wasn't that SeaMonkey logo great too? That was so cool when they picked SeaMonkey to be their because that was like the second or third version of the old Composer when it turned into SeaMonkey. I miss the SeaMonkey. So
I think I like it. It still exists. I still use it. It's super easy.
Oh, great. That makes me happy. I use blogs for everything because I really like the way I don't have to do any design choices at all. Like that navigation, everything, I just stick labels on things. It's like presto, instant navigation. So that Untextbook is a blog that's got like 6,000 pages or something, but I just built it over summer. Could just bang, bang, bang. I didn't have to do any navigation or anything. Just make sure I use the labels, and there it is. It runs itself. So.
Yeah, that's true. And the nice thing about blogs is that you can incorporate social media and get that multiplier.
Yep. I love using Twitter as a way to share like new content every day with the students, so they can see what I'm reading and looking at it at Twitter, that there's all this great stuff from museums and magazines and music. And since I teach, in addition to the Folklore course, I teach a course on India, it's really neat being able to share with them material from like Indian magazines and Indian artists and musicians right there in Twitter, and sometimes some of the Indian writers I've met, they know I'm teaching this course about India and Oklahoma, and sometimes they'll tweet me something and say, Laura, your students might be really interested in this article about Rama that showed up in this Indian newspaper. Here's a link. And that's cool, for the students in Oklahoma to feel connected to India right now, in real time.
I love that. And you're a Twitter, I say monster. You've got a great Twitter presence.
Well, it's so much fun. I have 2 Twitters. I do one for my classes, and then I have one where I agitate as an educator. And some of the students come watch me agitate as an educator, but most of them just use the course Twitter, which is, like I said, all the music and magazines and art and stuff like that.
Would you say when your students are like reading the folktales from different cultures, do they experience like some culture shock? Like, are there some concepts that is it common for concepts to like not come across very well, not translate very well between?
Right, and that's one of the trade-offs, is that when you take an anthology approach to the world, it's by definition it's kind of superficial. And when you look at the trade-offs and you think about how big the world is, I'm comfortable with that. The knowledge they're getting is kind of quick, kind of casual, but I really like the idea that, after they take the India class, say it's very likely they're going to meet people from India who have the names of the characters in the epics, right? So,
right.
Even if they are not going to necessarily engage in an in-depth theological discussion with them about the avatars of Vishnu, they know the names of the avatars of Vishnu and can appreciate what that means as a starting point, say. So to me, that's what general education can and should be about. They have their majors and they're getting in-depth knowledge in their other courses and majors. But if this is a chance for them to, take a quick trip to India in a semester, or a quick trip around the world, I think that has a virtue also.
That's wonderful.
And it's fun. Like I said, I put a high premium on fun in my classes. It's really fun.
Yeah, I see that you mentioned like sometimes you post like comic books from some of the myths and legends. I think that's really, really awesome.
The comic books.
Yeah.
This is where I have to give a huge shout out to my university. They have an open educational resources program. Susan, I think you've done that too. Is that right?
Did you? Yes.
One of those things?
Yeah.
Normally, it's for creating a kind of open textbook in a more traditional sense. But when I was talking to one of the librarians and told her about this amazing collection of Indian comic books from Amar Chitrakatha, hundreds of comic books that tell all the stories from the epics, she said, oh, you could do that as one of our OER projects. So we ordered the complete ultimate Amar Chitrakatha and a bunch of other Indian comic books and put them all on reserve in the library. So we just have one set, so there's just one copy, but there's hundreds of them, right? So I did a blog that profiles all the different comic books, and the students can go in and read those comic books, which is fantastic, right? Because these are the actual ancient myths and legends with art to help them visualize it. And those are the exact same comic books that kids in India grow up on. And so a lot of my students who have Indian heritage, they'll say, oh, my mom or my grandma was so excited that I was reading this comic book because they read that same comic book. So that's something that I really appreciate, the library being willing to do something kind of weird with me, because the comic books have been a great addition to that class. Absolutely fantastic.
Gosh,
Great.
I'd probably be in that library for like hours and hours, just kind of live there for a while.
Yeah. It's really great stuff. They are, some of them are kind of old and hokey, and then there's some new ones that are just really slick and beautiful to look at.
I think that the University of Oklahoma Library is just doing some fantastic things. I was in a meeting the other day, and they were talking about some of the programs they have to support professors who want to publish in open source and open access journals. And I mean, most of the time you have to pay a little bit because it's open access, and they will pay that fee for you. And I thought, because I always try to publish in those, just because I mean, maybe it's not all that prestigious, but I don't care. I want it to be out there.
Right, and it reaches different audiences that way. And like I said, I think about these things globally, and I would really like for people who live in places that don't have fancy university libraries to be able to use my stuff. There's a repository that OU participates in called OKShare, which is a open access library repository for the state of Oklahoma. And so the different Latin language anthologies that I wrote for teachers and students of Latin, I put all those in the repository, and I felt really good doing that because, like, not to be morbid, but we're all going to shuffle off this mortal coil eventually, and my blogs will all probably disappear and stuff, but it felt really good to put my stuff, it's just in PDF form, right, but the same PDF as the content of the physical books, to put that in the repository and know that the library will take good care of it, because that's what libraries do, right? They're in it for the long haul, and the OU library is great about supporting that.
Well, another thing you can do to commemorate yourself is to do a geoglyph.
Yeah, that is something. There we go. Only you would think of that, Susan, but that is another kind of mentality. Love it.
I'm just fascinated by the fact they found some new geoglyphs near Blythe, California, and they found them just like through Google Earth.
No kidding.
Yeah. There's the power of the internet right there.
Yep.
But I think somebody was flying over it from like some military base or whatever, and what am I seeing? So they went on Google Earth and whoa, that's like a scorpion.
Wow. Oh, I'm going to have to go find that. That's exactly the kind of thing I like to share with the students, because, the idea of art is not just in museums. People are out there and have been for millions of years doing stuff. I read a beautiful book called The Creative Spark when I was on my last plane trip. And it was about human evolution, and I'd never really been interested in hominid evolution. It all seemed kind of speculative to me. It's like they've got some bones. What can they know? But this was this great book about what we can understand from the stone tools and stuff that have survived. And the fellow who wrote the book taught himself how to make these stone tools, and what it takes, like what is the artist's mind and what are the artist's tools to be able to create these stone tools. I thought that was really cool. I'm not good at physical stuff. I do better with digital stuff, but I thought it was really neat that he wanted to learn how to make stone tools from a time probably before humans even had language.
Like these those Clovis stone points or whatever, these spear points, like the Clovis. Crazy.
Yeah, and these are even older than those, but yeah, exactly, same idea. So.
Right. Oh, I wanted to ask you, Laura, what's your opinion on like Disney adaptations of folklore and media adaptations?
Can I tell you that the Disney has been a problem. It's less of a problem now than it used to be, though. I have to say, when I first started, and this is where I can give a comparison, 15 years ago, students really were fixated on Disney, and Disney was kind of like the storytelling world that was their default. But what has happened since then is Harry Potter and Game of Thrones. And Harry Potter and Game of Thrones have really displaced a lot of the Disney energy in my students' minds, and now we've got all this great Star Wars stuff going on, so that's been a positive change for me, because Disney was not so helpful in getting students to really free up their minds and imagine their own stories. They had very deep sentimental memories of watching Disney films when they were kids, but it really wasn't mind expanding. But Harry Potter was great, and Game of Thrones also, where it just made you think about the complexities of stories and life and the things that you can do with really unusual characters and plots. So I'm glad to have see less Disney in the world of my classes. There's still some, and that's fine. You know, for the students who really are inspired by Disney, that's great. They can run with that. But for the most part, students are working with things like, you know, supernatural TV show or Game of Thrones or Harry Potter, other stuff than Disney nowadays. 15 years ago, not so much.
Oh, I see. And I was wondering, you talked about having your students do creative writing. Do you do creative writing yourself? And have you published any?
Yeah, I haven't published any, and that's the thing too. I try to get the students to see it. This is not so much that you want to publish and find an audience, although it's great if they do. Every once in a while, I'll have professional writing majors who use my class as a way to draft up a novella or a novel they want to work on in the future. But I see it more as you do this the way you would color in a coloring book. You know, it's a way to just have an experience and then share that experience with others if you want. But that's one of the reasons why I do projects like this folktale project this summer. You know, I take those folktales and do my own versions, tell them in my own way, and that's exactly the kind of thing that the students are doing as well. So we get to be co-learners, you know, and because I sometimes have stories that turn out great and sometimes stories I'm not so satisfied with, I can share their ups and downs too. And that's a great thing, right? It's about the process and what we can learn from each other during the process. That's school, right? So it's not the competitive world of publishing, it's the fun world of school.
That's amazing. All right, so we're getting close to the end of our time, and so you might be wondering why the show is called Life Edge. Well, we have a special question that we ask every guest, and so I'll ask you, if you could choose one thing about yourself or about your approach to life that you feel has really given you an edge, what would that be and why?
Oh, I guess curiosity, like asking questions about everything to the point of annoying the people around you. So yeah, long live curiosity. That's what I would say.
Right. That's great.
I love that too. And what, can you give us an example of when your curiosity really gave you an edge?
You know, edged is a word I don't use so much, but one thing that does happen to me a lot that I really enjoy is looking up words to find out where they come from. And I would really urge people, you know, if there's a word that someone uses and you're thinking, how did we get that word, or where did it come from? Look it up. There are tools online like etymonline.com, which will give you the origins of things. So I do words from India with my students. And let me tell you, a word from India that you probably don't know is from India. It's the word punch. Punch is the word for 5 in Sanskrit. And so when the British officers were over there, hot and sweaty in India during the Raj, they would drink punch, and it had 5 ingredients. And that is why punch was called punch, because traditional punch had 5 ingredients, and when they came back to England, they brought punch with them. Now, the only way you would know that is if you ask yourself, where did the word punch come from? But if you ask yourself that question and look it up, you will find out words travel around the world too, just like stories.
Oh, interesting.
Gosh, that's really fascinating. So
makes me wonder about the word edge.
Yeah, right?
That's exactly what I thought when you said that. I'm thinking, there's got to be one of those Germanic words, but I'm not sure, and I've never looked up the etymology of edge. So one of you all should do that, since this is your edge show. Find out. Maybe it'll give you some new insight.
That's probably true. It's sort of like the old Anglo-Saxon words are always like, well, I just love the fact that English is like, it has such dualities of the Anglo-Saxon and the Latinates. And
right.
They reflect the class differences.
Yeah, and there's some great materials about that online, you know, imagining what English would be like if it had stayed all Germanic. But I love all the words that come in. So I do words from mythology, you know, like Odyssey and stuff, people know. But the word syringe is a Greek word from the nymph Syrinx. You know, so there's all kinds of wild words and stories floating around in English. It's a fun language that way.
All right. Well, I'd just like to really thank you for coming on, Laura. It's been really great chatting with you. Everything's so fascinating, and I just really love the work you're doing and making, you know, getting people interested in folklore and making all this available to everyone. It's just really, really great work. And so,
well, it's all online, so go look for it. And if you can't find it, send me a note, and I'll see what I can do.
I'll be
so how will we get in touch with you?
Oh, I'm online course lady at Twitter, and I am at Twitter every day. So if you have a question or something, or you're looking for some materials I referred to in this talk, just tweet me, and I'll tweet you back. I promise.
I'll definitely be following you and spending a lot of time on your website.
Super.
So, all right. So that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on Life Edge. Bye. Bye now.
Bye.